Hi. So, as some of you know, this October I'm bringing out horror related content, that is, scary content that you could probably use to create some interesting adventures or even campaigns in role playing games. So, this time I'm going to talk about. I'll probably divide this video in several parts because there is a lot of using material to serve as inspiration for adventures. And in role playing games, there are so many undead that drain energy, or drain health, or drain the youth. That is, they make people old. So there are, or drain experience levels, or they drain different attributes, characteristics, ability scores, etc. So there is a very strong presence of those undead entities. Some of them are immaterial or material that attack the player characters in the game, and they are some of the scariest. Sometimes not because of their undead status or background, but because you don't want your character to lose those experience levels or ability scores when fighting them. For example, I remember many times in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons when my players were facing off against some whites, and they were like, "No, whites, get them away from us!" And they, the fighter was terrified of them because he was a fighter and he had to be on the front line, and they were always looking for a way, as any smart player should, to engage such undead creatures with missiles and projectiles, arrows, and bows. Or the cleric trying to turn those undead, or casting spells to keep them at bay. So yes, they are some of the most terrifying enemies, and in folklore. But again, sometimes they could become a bit too common. They could lose that sense of causing, of being disturbing, of being truly scary, because beyond their capacity of draining experience levels, ability scores, and whatnot, sometimes they are not as frightening. Sometimes they become a bit too common or stuck enemies. As I was saying, for example, in the case of in my other video, that sometimes werewolves or shapeshifters became a bit as common as orcs. So sometimes you saw like the werewolf armed with a sword and some type of shield, and you were like, ah, it didn't feel too scary at times, at least in games. So this time I want to approach things from a folkloric perspective, and I'm going to tell you a story, perhaps not as known to many people or as famous as other horror stories. Perhaps some of you have heard of that story, and I hope you will excuse me if I omit some details because it's been a while since I've heard that story. But to better understand that story, we have to take into consideration that in folklore there are many stories of undead or strange evil spirits and such that actually drain something from people. That is, the person starts to get sick, feels like their health is getting drained, or sometimes they become really old really fast, that they go into tombs and some places, and they come out and they come like really old for their age. Or other times they can like drain the luck out of someone, they start experiencing bad luck. So all of those things can be used to create some interesting adventures and campaigns in role-playing games. So moving on to this story, if I'm not mistaken, this supposedly happened around early 1400s, because the king of the Swedes at that time was Ericus, if I'm not mistaken. So it was probably early 1400s, perhaps a bit before or a bit after that. And it features two friends, although you kind of get the feeling that they could be, maybe they were like a gay couple, because some things between them were too passionate beyond friendship. It didn't feel like a sort of friendship. It felt more like a relationship, but in a more intimate way. So we had, if I'm not mistaken, it was Asmund and Aswith. So Asmund and Aswith were super best friends forever. So, but they made a bit of a pact, and here is where it gets really weird. This is not the type of pact that you do with a friend. The pact consisted of, if one of them died, the other one had to die too. So, for example, if Aswith dies, Asmund would have to give his own life as well. And that is exactly what happened. Aswith died before Asmund, so Asmund built this vault, this place to keep the corpse of Aswith, and he was going to bury himself, to lock himself in that vault with his friend's corpse, to die with him. So this is where things get somewhat strange. So he went on and had this vault and placed his friend's corpse within a sarcophagus, if I'm not mistaken. As I was telling you, I hope if someone has heard this story, I hope you will forgive some distorted details. And he brought with him a horse, a dog, and some meat. And that's really bizarre because, for example, in the case of the meat, supposedly Asmund didn't want to die from hunger, but if you're going to kill yourself already inside that vault, why would you want like your last meal? I think it would make more sense to enjoy it before that and not like taking it to prolong your suffering. So either way, he actually locked himself inside this crypt with his dead friend. And so some time passed by. They do not specify how much time passed by, if I'm not mistaken. And eventually Ericus, like many kings, heard about this vault, and there was a rumor that there were actually there was treasure inside that crypt. So he took a group of people and decided to rob that grave. But when they arrived to this locked vault, when they opened it, they found a ghastly scene. They saw the horse and the dog completely like dismembered, just torn to pieces. And they saw Asmund quite bloodied with claw marks on his face, and he was missing an ear. And I think the sarcophagus or the coffin, or where it was the Aswith's corpse was kept, was also open. So they interrogated Asmund as to what happened. So Asmund told them that Aswith actually had risen up from his grave and first attacked the horse and then the dog, and eventually attacked Asmund as well, clawing his face. And this is an interesting detail because, according to Asmund, when Aswith was attacking him, he left like a mark behind the ear. And this is very interesting because in folklore, when it comes to, for example, vampire attacks, they usually leave. There are some cases where they leave like a dark bluish or dark purplish mark just under the ear. And he had one of those marks, but he had also the ear ripped from his head, and he had those claw marks on his face. And supposedly Aswith had risen and attacked his own friend Asmund, and Asmund managed to chop the head of the corpse and drive a stake through the corpse's heart. And that's the way how Asmund supposedly protected himself. Now this is a very interesting thing because the entire story feels quite vampiric. That is, the supposed entity felt like a vampire. But there are some things that at times could not make so much sense, because, for example, why did he take a horse and a dog and the meat? That's very interesting. I think I'll go into more details about that on my next video, because it's related to another topic that can serve for some pretty cool RPG adventures. And in the case of the attack, I find it quite interesting because, let's say, if you were to handle this story from a low fantasy perspective, to put it in a way, I think it would have been more common for Aswith's spirit to float or kind of like materialize outside of his of the coffin, not like lifting up the lid and getting up like a zombie. No, it felt more like it makes more sense that it came out like sort of like a ghost or spirit. And maybe when Asmund felt attacked by the spirit of Aswith, he was actually like perhaps being possessed by the spirit of Aswith, and maybe he attacked the horse and the dog, and maybe he actually tore his own ear apart in his madness. Maybe he actually saw this like entity trying to choke him or throttle him or whatever and slash him, and he was actually like trying to get those ghostly hands off him, like get off me, and he mistakenly in his desperation maybe he ripped his own ear apart, and maybe he cut himself by accident. So that could make a bit more sense. A very interesting story nonetheless, and I think you can actually build an adventure around that concept, because maybe, as I was saying, maybe what if someone suddenly disappears and that person's horse suddenly dies, and that person's dog, the horse and the dog end up dead, and maybe you start to piece together that there was this crypt or vault where someone was taken, and maybe his best friend or lover, and it depends on how you want to handle that story, gets attacked, and he claims that it was actually his friend, and you are dealing now with sort of like a vampire or a vampirical type of creature that actually floats outside of its grave and attacks someone. It could be like a nice change of pace, because in role-playing games, such vampiric entities usually appear like in a body, like a vampire like Strat von Sadovich and such. So if you want to like a bit of a change of pace, you could have this like a vampiric spirit that is hiding away in this vault. You can play around with many of the elements. Perhaps you could just replace Ericus, the King of Sweets, with the player characters that heard about this crypt, and perhaps you could hide the corpse of Aswith, or any enemy that you want to play the part of the vampire, hide it someplace in perhaps a very complex labyrinth, underground labyrinth of sorts, and they have to find the corpse because maybe the spirit is constantly pestering them and attacking them. And perhaps even if, for example, if they go inside the crypt and they decide it's too much trouble, maybe the strange entity keeps hunting them, killing their animal companions, their henchmen, and their livestock if they have that property, that type of lifestyle within the game. So definitely you can create some interesting adventures around that concept. But as I was saying, in my next video I'm going to give some more details as to how you could work the fact in that story that Asmund brought some meat into the tomb, how you could play around with that element to create some more interesting adventures and campaigns. Well, thanks for watching this video. I hope it will serve you as fuel to create your own horror adventures and campaigns this month of October. And if you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.